There are moments in television that nobody sees coming, moments that stop everything and remind us why integrity matters more than winning. On a Tuesday evening in April 2024, Family Feud was recording what seemed like another typical episode. Two families stood ready to compete, the studio audience was energetic, and Steve Harvey was prepared to deliver his usual mix of humor and warmth. But what happened in the next 20 minutes would become one of the most talked about moments in game show history. When 52-year-old Margaret Chen raised her hand and did something that shocked everyone in the studio, Steve Harvey's reaction would prove that sometimes the most powerful lessons come from the most unexpected places. Before we continue with this incredible story, if you appreciate real moments of truth and integrity on television, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. You won't want to miss how this unfolds. Margaret Chen had been married to David Chen for 28 years. They had raised 3 children together in Portland, Oregon, where David worked as a successful insurance executive and Margaret ran a small bookkeeping business from their home. To anyone who knew them, they appeared to be the perfect family. David was charming and confident, always quick with a joke at social gatherings. Margaret was quiet and organized, the steady force that kept their household running smoothly. But perfection, as Margaret had learned over nearly 3 decades, was often just a carefully maintained illusion. Their marriage had struggled for the past 5 years. David had developed a gambling problem that he refused to acknowledge. What started as occasional trips to the casino had become a weekly obsession. Margaret had discovered the problem 2 years earlier when she noticed irregular withdrawals from their joint savings account. When she confronted David, he promised to stop. He swore it was just a phase, that he had everything under control. Margaret wanted to believe him. She had been raised by parents who immigrated from Taiwan in the 1960s with nothing but hope and determination. Her mother had worked as a seamstress while her father took on multiple jobs to support their family. They had taught Margaret that marriage was sacred, that you stood by your partner through difficult times, that family loyalty meant everything. Her mother would often say that a good wife was patient, understanding, and willing to sacrifice for the harmony of her home. For 2 years, Margaret tried to be that patient wife. She picked up extra bookkeeping clients to compensate for the money David was losing. She made excuses when their adult children asked why their parents seemed stressed. She smiled through family dinners while David told stories about his latest business successes, knowing that those successes were increasingly rare and that their savings were disappearing faster than she could replenish them. 3 months before their Family Feud appearance, Margaret had discovered something that changed everything. David had not only continued gambling, he had taken out a second mortgage on their house without her knowledge. They were now $60,000 in debt, and their home was at risk. When Margaret confronted him, David had dismissed her concerns. He told her she was overreacting, that he had a system, that one big win would solve everything. He made her feel small for worrying, foolish for not trusting him. Margaret had spent weeks in quiet desperation, unsure what to do. She could not bring herself to tell their children the truth. She could not bear to admit to her elderly mother that her marriage was crumbling. The shame felt overwhelming. Then one evening, while scrolling through her phone to distract herself from her anxiety, Margaret saw an advertisement for Family Feud. They were holding auditions in Portland for families who wanted to compete on the show. David had always loved Family Feud. He watched it religiously, shouting answers at the television, convinced he would be better than the contestants. When Margaret showed him the advertisement, his eyes lit up with excitement. For the first time in months, she saw genuine enthusiasm from him. Perhaps, she thought, this could be something positive they could do together. Perhaps the shared experience might help them reconnect. They applied along with Margaret's sister Linda and her husband, plus their nephew Tom. The family was selected after a successful audition. David was thrilled. He talked endlessly about strategy, about how he was going to win them the big money, about how this was the kind of opportunity that could change everything. Margaret said nothing about the irony of his words. She simply hoped that maybe this experience would remind him of what truly mattered. The taping day arrived in early April. The family gathered backstage at the Family Feud studio, all dressed in coordinating outfits that Margaret had carefully selected. Navy blue and white, classic and respectable. David was energized, confident, dominating the conversation with their fellow contestants and the production staff. He positioned himself as the family leader, the one who would guide them to victory. Margaret watched him with a mixture of sadness and recognition. This was the man she had married, the confident charmer who believed he could conquer any challenge. But beneath that confidence now lay something desperate, something that frightened her. She saw how his hands trembled slightly when he thought nobody was looking. She noticed how he kept checking his phone, probably monitoring sports scores, calculating odds. Their opponents were the Morrison family from Texas. They were friendly and energetic, bringing their own brand of Southern charm to the competition. Steve Harvey took the stage to thunderous applause, and the game began. The first round was straightforward. The question was about popular vacation destinations. David buzzed in first and answered correctly with Hawaii. The audience cheered. David pumped his fist, turned to Margaret with a triumphant smile. She smiled back, trying to share his enthusiasm, trying to forget about the mortgage documents hidden in her purse, the ones she had brought to show their daughter after the taping, the ones that proved everything David had denied. The Chen family won the first round easily. David answered 3 questions correctly, playing up to the audience, making Steve Harvey laugh with his quick wit. Margaret's sister Linda contributed a good answer. Margaret herself gave a solid response when it was her turn. They were working well as a team on the surface. The second round proved more challenging. The question was about reasons people lie. Steve Harvey read the question with his characteristic delivery. David buzzed in immediately. To avoid getting in trouble, he said confidently. The answer was on the board, but it was only the number 4 answer. The Morrison family stole the round, and the game was suddenly tied. During the third round, something shifted. The question was about things people do when they are in debt. Margaret felt her stomach tighten. She glanced at David, who showed no reaction to the irony. The Morrisons won the face-off and began answering. Cut spending was the number 1 answer. Take a second job was number 2. Then they said, ask family for help, which was number 3. Steve Harvey turned to them for the 4th answer. Gamble to try to win money back. The Morrison father said. The audience made a collective sound of recognition. The answer was on the board at number 7. But it struck Margaret like a physical blow. She looked at David, who was laughing uncomfortably, shaking his head as if to dismiss the notion as ridiculous. The Chen family won that round and took control of the game. They went on to win the main game decisively, with David continuing to position himself as the hero. By the time they reached fast money, they had won the right to play for $20,000. The family huddled together for a moment of celebration. David pulled Margaret close, whispering in her ear, "See, I told you I had a system. This is just like my sports betting. When you know what you're doing, you always win." Margaret felt something break inside her at those words. The casual comparison between a game show and his gambling addiction. The complete lack of awareness that his system had destroyed their financial security. The presumption that this game show victory somehow validated his behavior. Fast money began with Margaret's nephew Tom going first. He did reasonably well, scoring 142 points. That meant Margaret, who was chosen to go second, needed only 58 points to win the $20,000. She walked to the podium, her heart pounding, her mind racing with thoughts that had nothing to do with game show questions. Steve Harvey approached Margaret with his warm smile. "Margaret, you ready to bring this home for your family?" he asked. Margaret looked at him, then looked back at David, who was standing with the rest of their family, giving her a thumbs up, completely confident that she would deliver the victory he believed he had orchestrated. "I'm ready, Steve," Margaret said quietly. "But first, I need to say something." Steve's expression shifted to curiosity. The studio audience quieted. Something in Margaret's tone indicated this was not going to be typical game show banter. "My husband David is standing over there feeling very proud right now," Margaret began, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "He thinks he won this game for our family. He thinks his confidence and his quick answers are what got us here. And maybe that's partially true. But there's something everyone needs to know. She turned to look directly at David, whose smile was beginning to fade. David has a gambling addiction. For the past 5 years, he has been gambling away our savings, our retirement, our security. 3 months ago, I discovered he took out a second mortgage on our house without my knowledge. We are now $60,000 in debt because of his addiction, and our home is at risk. The studio fell completely silent. Steve Harvey's expression shifted from confusion to concern. David's face had gone pale, then red. He tried to interrupt, but Margaret raised her hand. "I'm not finished," she said, her voice growing stronger. "For 2 years, I have made excuses for him. I have lied to our children. I have covered up his problem because I was taught that a good wife protects her husband, that family harmony matters more than truth. But standing here, about to potentially win money that David will absolutely gamble away within a week, I realized something. Protecting someone from the consequences of their actions is not love. It's enabling, and I'm done." David tried to walk toward her, his face a mixture of anger and humiliation. "Margaret, what are you doing? This is not the time or place." Margaret turned to face him fully. "You're right. The time was 2 years ago when I first discovered what you were doing. The time was 3 months ago when you mortgaged our house. The time was every single day I stayed silent while you destroyed our future. But since I missed all those opportunities to tell the truth, this moment will have to do." David reached the podium, his voice low and angry. "You're humiliating me on national television. How dare you?" And that was when it happened. Margaret's hand moved almost before she realized it. The slap echoed through the studio. Not hard enough to cause injury, but sharp enough to be heard, clear enough to convey 28 years of suppressed frustration, financial betrayal, and broken trust. The audience gasped. Steve Harvey's mouth fell open in complete shock. David stumbled backward, his hand on his cheek, his expression a mixture of disbelief and rage. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Steve Harvey stepped between them, his hands raised. Okay. Let's everybody take a breath here," he said, his voice calm but firm. He looked at Margaret, then at David, then back at Margaret. "Margaret, I need you to help me understand what's happening here." Margaret's eyes filled with tears, but her voice remained steady. "Steve, I'm sorry for disrupting your show. I know this isn't how things are supposed to go, but I couldn't stand there and answer questions to win money that would disappear into a casino within days, while pretending everything is fine. I couldn't play along with the illusion anymore." Steve looked at her for a long moment. Then he turned to David. "Sir, is what your wife is saying true?" David's jaw was clenched. "This is a private family matter. It has nothing to do with this show." Steve shook his head. "Well, see, that's where you're wrong, because this show is about families. And what I'm hearing is that your family is in crisis, partly because of choices you've made, partly because your wife has been carrying a burden she shouldn't have to carry alone." He turned back to Margaret. "Margaret, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. If you win this money today, what will happen to it?" Margaret took a deep breath. "If I win this money, it will go directly toward paying off the debt my husband created. It will help save our home, and I will make sure he has no access to it. But more importantly, Steve, I'm going to use this moment, humiliating as it is, to finally tell the truth, to stop protecting someone who needs to face consequences, to stop being silent about a problem that's destroying our family." The Steve Harvey stood quietly for a moment, processing everything he had just witnessed. The studio audience was still silent, uncertain how to react. This was far beyond the usual game show drama. This was real pain, real struggle, real desperation playing out in front of them. "Margaret," Steve finally said, his voice gentle, "what you just did took more courage than most people will ever have to show in their entire lives. You told the truth when it was hard. You stood up for yourself when it would have been easier to stay quiet. And while I can't condone the slapping part," he paused as nervous laughter rippled through the audience, "I understand the frustration behind it." He turned to David. "Sir, I don't know you. I don't know your whole story. But what I do know is that you've got a wife who loves you enough to tell you the truth in the hardest possible way. She could have stayed silent, let you keep spiraling, and then just left you when everything fell apart. Instead, she's trying to save you by forcing you to face what you've been doing. David's anger seemed to deflate. He looked at Margaret, then at Steve, then down at the floor. "I don't have a gambling problem," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. I have it under control." Steve shook his head. "Brother, if your wife is standing on national television telling the world that you've gambled away your savings and mortgaged your house without her knowledge, you do not have it under control. And the first step toward getting help is admitting that." The production crew had been conferring off camera. A producer approached Steve and whispered something to him. Steve nodded, then turned back to the family. "Here's what we're going to do," Steve said. "Margaret, you're still going to play fast money. You're still going to have a chance to win that $20,000. But before we do that, I need David to make a choice right here, right now." He looked directly at David. "You can walk off this stage right now. You can leave in anger and humiliation. You can go home and tell everyone that your wife wronged you on television, or you can stand here, in front of all these people, and admit that you have a problem and that you need help. What's it going to be?" The studio remained silent. Every eye was on David. His face was a mixture of emotions: anger, shame, fear, pride. Margaret watched him, tears streaming down her face, waiting to see if the man she had married was still in there somewhere, beneath the addiction and denial. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, David spoke. "I have a gambling problem," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I need help." The audience erupted in applause. Steve stepped forward and put his hand on David's shoulder. "That's the first step, brother. That's courage right there." He then looked at Margaret. "And you, standing up for your family the way you did, that's courage too. Now let's see if we can get you some money to help fix what's been broken." Margaret completed the fast money round in a daze. Her answers were solid, steady, and she won the $20,000. But as the confetti fell and the audience cheered, she was not celebrating the money. She was watching David, who was crying now, really crying, as their adult children who had been called to the studio rushed onto the stage to embrace both their parents. After the taping concluded, Steve Harvey did something unprecedented. He announced that he would personally connect the Chen family with addiction counseling resources and financial advisors who could help them navigate their debt. He also made arrangements for them to appear on his talk show in 3 months to give an update on their progress. When the episode aired 6 weeks later, the response was immediate and overwhelming. The clip of Margaret slapping David became one of the most viewed moments in game show history. But it was not just the shocking moment people were talking about. It was the conversation that followed, Steve Harvey's compassionate response, David's admission, and Margaret's courage in speaking truth. Mental health professionals and addiction counselors praised the episode for bringing attention to gambling addiction and the toll it takes on families. Marriage counselors used it as a teaching example about the danger of enabling and the importance of truth telling in relationships. Financial advisors discussed how gambling addiction affects family finances and the warning signs to watch for. The Chen family appeared on Steve Harvey's talk show 3 months later, as promised. David had completed intensive addiction treatment and was attending Gamblers Anonymous meetings regularly. Margaret had joined a support group for families affected by gambling addiction. They had worked out a strict financial plan to pay off their debt and were in marriage counseling together. Their home had been saved. During that appearance, Steve asked Margaret if she regretted slapping David on television. Margaret thought carefully before answering. "I regret that it took getting to that breaking point," she said. "I regret all the years I stayed silent. I regret enabling his addiction by covering for him. But do I regret that moment being the catalyst for change? No. Sometimes love requires tough truth, even when delivering that truth is messy and imperfect." David added his own perspective. What Margaret did was humiliating. It was painful. But it was also the most loving thing she could have done, because she was willing to sacrifice our privacy and her own comfort to force me to face what I had been denying. That slap woke me up in a way that nothing else had. It was a physical manifestation of all the pain I had been causing her, all the damage I had been doing to our family. The impact of their story extended far beyond their own family. Hundreds of people reached out to share their own experiences with gambling addiction, either personally or in their families. Support groups reported increased attendance. Treatment centers saw more people reaching out for help. The episode sparked a national conversation about gambling addiction, a problem that often remains hidden because of shame and stigma. Steve Harvey reflected on the experience in interviews, saying that it was one of the most powerful moments of his television career. "You can script drama, but you cannot script truth," he said. What Margaret did was raw and real. It was someone at the end of their rope making a desperate choice to save their family, and sometimes that's what real love looks like. Not pretty, not comfortable, but necessary. 1 year after the episode aired, the Chen family had paid off more than half their debt. David had been clean from gambling for over a year, the longest period since his addiction began. Margaret had expanded her bookkeeping business and was working with a nonprofit to provide financial literacy education to families affected by gambling addiction. Their adult children had reported that their parents' relationship was stronger than it had been in years, built now on honesty rather than illusion. The episode became part of Family Feud's legacy, remembered not just for the shocking moment, but for the honest conversation about addiction, family, and the courage it takes to tell the truth when staying silent would be easier. It proved that game shows could be more than entertainment. They could be platforms for real human stories that sparked important conversations and potentially saved lives. Margaret's story inspired other women to speak up about problems in their marriages rather than suffering in silence. Support groups for families affected by addiction cited the episode as a turning point in how gambling addiction was perceived by the public. The episode won awards for its handling of a sensitive topic and for Steve Harvey's compassionate response to an unprecedented situation. The Chen family's Christmas card that year included a note to everyone who had reached out with support. "Truth is painful," they wrote, "but silence is more destructive. Thank you for holding space for our messy, imperfect journey toward healing." The story of what happened on Family Feud that April afternoon became more than just a viral moment. It became a reminder that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable destructive behavior, even when confronting it means risking everything. It showed that courage looks different than we often imagine. Sometimes it looks like a quiet woman finally finding her voice, even if that voice cracks with pain. And sometimes it looks like a man humbled enough to admit he needs help. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of the importance of truth and accountability in relationships, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Share this story with someone who might need to hear it, because Margaret's courage in that moment continues to inspire thousands of people to have the difficult conversations that can save families, restore trust, and prove that it is never too late to choose honesty over comfort.